The rain fell hard that night, slicing through the cold like shards of broken glass. A man stood in the open street, shivering, his jacket thin, his boots worn down to leather scraps. Behind him, a line of others waited, men and women, tired, soaked, and silent. And at the front of it all, one voice cut through the storm. "Who do you think you are? You can't build this here. No one asked you to." The words came from a man in a polished coat, his umbrella shielding him from the rain. His tone was sharp, filled with authority. The crowd behind him murmured, eyes shifting between anger and pity. And in the middle stood the veteran. He didn't answer. He didn't bow. He only looked at the man with quiet defiance, water dripping from his brow, his hands clutching a wooden beam he had carried on his back for half a mile. No one knew it yet, but that single moment, one man, silent under the storm, daring to build a shelter where none had been, would change everything. His name was Thomas Hale. Once he wore medals that glinted in the sun, a uniform pressed sharp with pride, and boots that echoed on desert sand. The battlefield had shaped him, stripped him, and scarred him. He remembered the smell of burning dust after explosions, the metallic tang of blood that lingered in his mouth for days, the dry wind that whispered names of the fallen. Thomas had led men into chaos and brought fewer back than he had taken. He carried that weight in silence. Nights haunted him, mornings pressed on him like stone, and crowds made him feel like a stranger in his own homeland. When he returned, the world had moved on. People shook his hand, thanked him politely, and walked away. But when he struggled, when the nightmares grew, when jobs slipped through his fingers, there was no line of support behind him. Thomas had once built forward bases out of scraps in foreign deserts, walls from sandbags, roofs from canvas. Now, standing homeless on his own soil, he wondered why he could build shelter for soldiers overseas, but not for veterans left stranded in his own city. The streets became his training ground, cardboard for insulation, park benches for beds. Each night, he studied the faces of others, old men with faded tattoos, young women clutching coats too thin for the frost, children whose laughter had been stolen by hunger. He listened to their stories. A soldier's widow turned away by landlords, a Marine limping on a cane, a medic broken by memory. Thomas knew he couldn't save everyone, but he could build something that would stand against the cold, against the silence of a city that refused to see them. When Thomas dragged the first wooden beam to an abandoned lot near the river, people watched from a distance. Some shook their heads, some whispered, others simply walked by. The lot belonged to the city, fenced off and forgotten. Weeds grew taller than men, trash lay scattered, and the rusted frame of an old warehouse leaned like a broken soldier. To most, it was worthless. To Thomas, it was ground zero for a mission no one had ordered, but he had sworn to carry out. He worked in silence. His hands blistered, nails bit into wood, rope frayed against his skin. At night, he slept beside the half-raised walls, keeping watch as if the shelter were already alive, already full of brothers and sisters who needed it. But the city didn't stay silent. Officials came, papers in hand, voices sharp. "You have no permit. This is illegal. You can't just build whatever you want." Thomas said nothing. His silence unnerved them. They were used to arguments, to resistance, to shouting. But silence was harder to crush. Neighbors passed by, some sneering, some scoffing. "What's the point? He can't save everyone. He's just a crazy vet with a hammer." Their words floated into the night, but Thomas never answered. He hammered nails with the rhythm of a heartbeat, steady, relentless. Each insult was a test. Each sneer was a reminder. He had fought in places where bullets spoke louder than words. Compared to that, this was nothing. And yet, it stung. Because these weren't enemies. These were his own people. One night, as Thomas lifted a beam alone, his arms trembling under the weight, A hand reached out from the shadows. A man, younger, ragged, face hollowed by hunger, grabbed the other side. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The next night, another came. A woman with tired eyes and calloused palms. Then another, and another. Veterans who had been watching, waiting, too afraid to believe in anything again, too tired to hope. But Thomas had lit something in them. Not with speeches, not with promises, but with action. The shelter rose piece by piece. Walls patched together from scraps, roof from tin sheets. Inside, cots lined with blankets donated by strangers who had begun to notice. The smell of soup began to replace the stench of damp streets. For the first time in years, laughter returned, faint but real. Still, opposition grew louder. Inspectors came. Police hovered. A man in a polished coat arrived again, his umbrella gleaming. "You can't keep this up. It's against the rules. People don't want this kind of place in their neighborhood." Thomas only looked at him, his silence cutting deeper than anger ever could. Winter bore down. Snow piled on the half-built roof. Hunger gnawed at those who gathered inside. Whispers spread. The city would shut them down any day. People stopped donating. Fear crept in. But Thomas pressed on. He rose before dawn, his breath fogging in the freezing air, his body aching, his memories clawing at him. Still, he built. He taught others how to patch walls, how to cook in bulk, how to stand watch. The shelter was no longer his alone. It belonged to everyone who touched it, who slept under its roof, who found warmth inside. And yet, officials prepared to tear it down. Notices were taped to the entrance. Deadlines were given. Clear the premises or be removed. Thomas stood at the door, reading the paper. Behind him, dozens of eyes watched, waiting to see if hope had been a lie. He didn't speak. He didn't flinch. He folded the paper, set it aside, and went back to work. The day came when trucks rolled toward the lot. Workers with hard hats, officers with radios, officials with pens and folders. They expected resistance. They expected chaos. They expected Thomas to finally break. Instead, when the trucks stopped, they found a wall of veterans standing shoulder to shoulder, old and young, men and women, some with canes, some in wheelchairs, some carrying scars you could see, others carrying scars you couldn't. And behind them, inside the shelter, were children wrapped in blankets, women stirring pots of soup, men repairing cots. The workers hesitated. The officials stammered. Cameras had gathered, drawn by whispers of what Thomas had built. Reporters stepped closer. The world was watching now. Thomas stepped forward. His face was lined, his hands rough, but his back was straight. He spoke at last, his voice low but steady. "You sent us to fight for freedom. Now you want to take away the roof over our heads. We built this with nothing. We built this together. Tear it down if you must, but know this, we will rebuild. Again and again. Because healing doesn't come from waiting. Healing comes from serving." Silence fell. The workers shifted uncomfortably. The officers lowered their eyes. The polished man with the umbrella clenched his jaw but said nothing. And in that silence, something shifted. Not in Thomas, but in everyone else. The crowd that had once doubted now stood taller. Bystanders stepped forward, joining the line. And slowly, one by one, the workers set down their tools. What began as one man's mission became a movement. Donations flooded in. Churches sent food. Local carpenters offered lumber. Lawyers volunteered to fight the city's claims. Within weeks, the shelter was no longer fragile, but strong. Its walls painted, its floors sturdy, its roof high enough to keep out the worst of storms. Dozens slept safely each night. Dozens found meals waiting, and dozens found something deeper. Dignity restored, community rekindled, hope reborn. Thomas never sought recognition. He never stood at a podium or demanded applause. He simply kept building, even when his hands bled, even when his body ached. When asked why, he said only this: "Some of us came home broken, but when we build for each other, we heal, piece by piece, nail by nail, not alone, but together." One evening, as the sun sank behind the city skyline, the shelter stood glowing with lantern light. Outside, people gathered, neighbors, strangers, veterans, families. They stood not in protest, but in respect, a silent salute to a man who had asked for nothing but given everything. The polished man with the umbrella passed once more, his steps slow, his eyes downcast. But this time he said nothing. He couldn't. The shelter's existence was louder than his protests had ever been, and so the shelter remained, not just as walls and a roof, but as proof. Proof that one man's silence could speak louder than a crowd. Proof that healing could come not from pity, but from purpose. Proof that when one veteran refused to give up, dozens were saved. Thomas Hale never called himself a hero. He simply built. But in that building, he showed something undeniable. The truest strength lies not in what we carry for ourselves, but in what we build for others. Healing comes from serving. Where are you watching from tonight? Share your thoughts below. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, make sure to subscribe for more. Together we keep their stories alive.